about interesting topic. And again, I hopefully it won't be deaf by PowerPoint, even though I have 30 slides. This is a little bit of myself, but you see me here so much. I'll skip it. I'm a psychologist. But I didn't want to be a psychologist, actually. I spend my time, most of the time, with animals, observing the nature. And I think that's one of the greatest sources of inspiration. As a kid, I would go and kind of get lost in the forest, little Red Riding Hood. And then my parents would have to go, and I would observe animals and plants and bees and all kind of stuff. And I still do that. And I think nature is a source of amazing inspiration. And I think instead of, well, we can look up, but we can also look around and see what are those organisms doing, because evolution has not stopped, and this is the production of millions of years of evolutions. And so what I do and what we do is we work with the naked apes called humans. We are a whole bunch of psychologists, neuroscientists, data nerds, and then we observe what we do as human beings and how we interact. We are in the interesting intersection of behavioral science, technology, and business innovation. And I'm sure if you've seen my talk, you've already seen that. Bottom line is we actually believe that's still the most untapped natural resource is human mind, but it extends beyond the brain. It's not just raw computational power. It's not just pattern recognition, whether it's a cat or not a cat. It's the ability to observe something and move it forward. It's the ability to read one's body, read another body, and adjust and modulate both myself and yourself and be able to inspire you and be inspired by you, and hopefully build something much better for this world. What Alexandra said yesterday, we are living code. We get excited about the code that is able to chat with humans. Babies do that, and they very quickly learn from the observation. They understand the context. They understand if they're bilingual, they know when to speak Chinese or Polish and when they speak English, right? Very, very quickly. Pretty amazing how the mind changes the brain and vice versa. So here's your answer to consciousness. Now, what I think is really interesting about organizations, because we got brought into work with organizations a lot, and usually it's about, how can you make this product better? How can you make the service better? How can it serve basic human needs? And that's very interesting. But usually when we go in, and I'm a psychologist, I see it's something usually with the organization, right? Yes, the products and services are fantastic, but usually in order to win in the market force or market, you have to win with the workforce. And so it's usually something happening within the team, within the power structure, team dynamics, all kind of stuff. And so my inspiration around that was like, well, why don't we treat organization as organisms, just as we have the kind of artificial split within the human body of the mind and the body, which is completely artificial. And so what if we pull that kind of metaphor a little bit further, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Who's ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Give somebody a high five, just to get the energy flowing. Okay. This is actually a slide from my masterclass, Hacking Wisdom, so I'll pull a lot from there, too. So again, usually the talks I give is about hacking the human OS. This is more about hacking the corporate OS. Again, group dynamics versus an individual. But I think you can draw some parallels. You can think about the head, which is the cognitive system, the cognitive structure, as the strategy. You can think about the heart, the source of emotions and fears and hopes and dreams as the culture, right? Is that culture allowing this? You can think about the body that actually does things and turns ideas into tangible things, manipulates the data into tactics, and then others are teams and partnerships and alliances that you build as a corporation or as an enterprise. And so very, very quickly, because I'm super wary of time, I want to say, this is it, and then so what? Because that's how my brain thinks. There's an interesting theory now, so what? What do we do with that? Well, the head is the source of the psychological OS. It's the assumptions, biases, expectations we have. Again, in corporate is the strategy. Very interesting research, old research, but I like to talk about it. It's Daniel Schachter from Harvard, who actually shows that the human brain, in order to simulate the future, usually uses the past, and then it just projects the past onto the future. And so what he says, and many other people say, and if you observe the most charismatic leaders, those are the people who are actually able to tell a story of a future that is not a continuation of the past. We did that a little bit yesterday, right? Can you untether yourself from what is and throw yourself into the future that is so appealing and tell a story about this future that is visually stimulating, that is sensory stimulating, that has the why in it, that just feels like reality, so that you anchor that future and you take people with you. And some of the best leaders, as we know, said, started their speeches with, "I have a dream." And a lot of those dreams seem very weird and lofty and impossible at that time, and yet, they became reality. So do you remember the future? Is your future a remembering of the past, or is it really imagining it? And are you able to take people with you? Now, a lot of people know about the SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-oriented. Great thing. But what if you stretch it? And something we did yesterday was we threw ourselves back there, and then you look back, and you see what are the obstacles, what are the problems that might have happened. And actually, psychology shows that people who actually, we're polished, so we're the cynics, we're the naysayers. People say, "This is a great idea." I'm like, "Did you think it might fail?" And we're the party poopers. But actually, companies need the party pooper. Companies, it's called pre-mortem, and let me just show you. This is pre-mortem analysis, and Dan Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize in economics, is actually a psychologist in 2002. He says, in order to overcome most of the biases that they got the Nobel Prize for, he says one of the best things you can do is actually do the pre-mortem. So the duck can decide whether it's going to, lay the golden eggs, or whether pre-mortem, or whether it's going to end up on the plate. Pre-mortem, the idea is, what if it failed, right? And you imagine the worst-case scenario, you can work backwards. What failed? What didn't we do well? What were the obstacles? So it's seeing the glass a little bit of half empty, just for the purpose of filling it up and having it full again, And so the heart is the culture. It's thinking fast and slow, Kahneman and Tversky, system 1 versus system 2, rapid decision-making, kind of being impulsive and responding to what is, responding to the fear, the anxieties, versus kind of the more elaborated, logical thinking. Incorporate its culture. And so one of the, I think, best tools that I've seen, and it's being used wildly, is the idea is connect and redirect, which leads to name it to tame it, right? Think of emotions. Somebody talked about the hippos in the room. Well, emotions are the gigantic big oxes, right? What do you do with an ox? You can't push it because it weighs, 1,000 pounds. You can't pull it because it just does whatever it wants. It just is, right? And that's kind of what it wants. And the best thing is to kind of roll with it. And so research shows, and I'm happy to bring in neuroscience into this, is actually naming the emotion that is. Emotional labeling is one of the hallmarks of emotional intelligence, naming one's emotions and being able to regulate one's own emotions, which means in that case, I can regulate your emotion, and I can regulate the emotions between us. Resilience. A lot of people talk to us about resilience. Again, this quote has been already cited this morning. Actually, I don't think it comes from Charles Darwin. If you go and Google it, they actually say somebody else said it. It doesn't matter. It's a great quote, so let's keep it. Now, resilience in complex system. And one of the things that we see is very often people say, well, how do we bounce back? When you have a complex system that we are as human beings and organizations are, very often the ball doesn't bounce back to the same place, right? It bounces back, but it will end up somewhere else, because that's life, right? Things barely ever come back to the same state. The change is the only constant. So when you actually think of the most complex systems, which we are, and which are the most resilient, they have those 3 characteristics. The first one is, first of all, they acknowledge their messiness, their imperfections, and non-linearity, right? Things are never perfect. Nature, organic things are usually not smooth by itself. Frequent failures are essential for resilience, and this is what came out yesterday at the session this morning, that fear of failure is one of the biggest things that companies fear. And then finally, and I think this is the most interesting one, is that reorganization is part of the healing. What if on the way, as you bounce back and you reorganize, that's also healing? And that's really where psychology comes in, right? You can't order that in. It has to be the softer work with the people and actually letting them kind of heal as they bounce back. What's really important for this is coherent narrative. What we see in research is that people and companies and groups of people that are able to connect their past with their present and their future are the most resilient ones, because you have anchors on both sides, right? So saying, this is how it used to be, there's a new CEO, there's a new person, thick black line or thick red line, and we start from the beginning. that actually doesn't serve resilience. It is recognizing what was and that kind of rolling into the future with that. And so I don't really have time to go into this, but this is the ABC of resilience. Very interesting model developed at Dartmouth. Kind of talks about the cognitive spin that we put on things, right? We fall, we trip, whatever, and then we land and we say, ta-da. But why do we say ta-da? We say ta-da because we thought this was actually useful. And so the cognition is super important. The body, the tactics. In the human nature, this is our primary language. We communicate so much with the body. We pick up each other's emotions way before we actually say anything. That's why the research on chatbots is so interesting, because we actually pick a lot, not only from face for the entire body posture. I think the major shift that's happening is from power over into power to. And it's a just different definition of power. Power over is, you'll do this or whatever. Power to means power to speak up, power to take ownership, power to drive change. And power to has to do with control. We see in research on human motivation over and over again that we're willing to go places and do very difficult tasks that are just, very difficult, and we do it forever, if we have a sense of control, that I actually had a choice in that. And so the major, and it's actually a tool. A lot of psychologists would say this is a learned skill set of turning chores into choices. And I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about wisdom, and I said, so what is wisdom for you? And they said, this scene from Karate Kid, you know which one? When the little kid goes and he wants to learn how to be wise, and he says, well, here is a mop, and mop the screen, whatever. Yes. Shield or whatever it was, right? Shield, yeah. Back and forth, back and forth. Right? How do you turn chore into a choice and actually gain wisdom from that? Well, that's interesting. And then finally, because I'm running out of time, a lot of research about how we wired to be social, both from my perspective as social psychologist, neuroscience. Now we're actually saying not only we wired to be social and hardwired to be social, we're actually hardwired to be hypersocial. Social baseline theory, very interesting theory that pulls in a lot of research and says the brain's default state, that's what the brain expects, is collaboration. And things that default out of that, it actually causes stress, and there's consequences to that. Now, this morning, Scott Anthony was talking about the Wright Brothers, and it was a fantastic story. But what was in my mind was like, well, how did they do it, right? Why was everybody trying to fly? Kind of strap the wings and crash, whereas those two figure it out. Well, turns out their mechanics said, well, those two were fighting all the time, right? He says they got really mad. Well, I don't think they got really mad, but they got awfully hot, right? So they were able to clash and exchange ideas and yell at each other and yet reach some kind of conclusion. I think that is such an important skill in life, is having that window of tolerance to be able to go and clash, because we do clash. Right? This is how we forge. This is how we get energy, and that's a good thing. But how do you not steam out and explode and just say, this is stupid, I'm leaving the room? And so those are a couple just tools to how to creatively collide. They're actually backed by science. The first one is framing as a debate, not necessarily conflict. Framing is so important in psychology. Actually, there's a whole bunch of research showing that actually affects how the brain perceives information, how it reacts, and how that amygdala reacts to the situation. Second of all, argue if you're right, but listen as if you were wrong. Crucial, right? Research on power actually shows, done at NYU, shows that people who, where we boost their kind of power, first of all, they start looking into people's eyes, which is, and listening follows, but which is interesting. What power does to us, we stop listening and we stop paying attention. That humbleness kind of disappears, yes. Just artificially kind of priming power into people. And then finally, making respectful interpretation. There's so much power in saying, did I hear you say that? Is that right, what you're saying? Very important. And so, and I think this is really interesting about power. We have this thing in US right now, the hashtag #MeToo and a whole bunch of scandals going around about abuse of power. And I want to talk about wolf packs because, again, we can learn a lot from wolves. And a lot of people have as their spirit animal, as their kind of, symbol, alpha male of a wolf. Well, this is research. Those are people who actually study wolves and kind of live with the wolves. And this is just an extract. They say that there was this one wolf, they called it number 21. And this wolf was a super wolf, right? He never lost a battle. He was like the super alpha. But what it turned his favorite thing when he came back home was playing with the pups. And he would go and he would lay down with his belly up, and the pups would go and they would bite his ears and do whatever. And he would be submissive in some way. He would, the most of the decisions would be done by the alpha female. Now this is usually, when you actually observe the wolf pack, this is what alpha wolves do, right? They're powerful where they need to and they protect. But at the same time, they extremely kind of, I don't want to say submissive, but very playful and very non-dominant in that way as we understand. And so the bottom line of this particular article said that strength impresses us, but it's really the kindness that we remember the best. And so the take-home message, because I'm out of time, is, if you want to hack the corporate OS, take the full human with you, with its head, with its heart, with its body, and its, everything around it. And don't forget that, we carry those wild animals with us, so respect that as well. And so that's it. Thank you.
Amazing.